My name is Alara Vance, and for 40 years I was a ghost in my own life. The year I died, I was sorting through my husband's belongings. Marcus Thorne, the man I had loved with a foolish, desperate heart, had finally succumbed to age, leaving me with a final cruel instruction in his will. He did not wish to be buried beside me. For decades of marriage and in death he still saw me as unworthy. It was then, amidst the dust of his study, that I found them. Not just a few but over 1,000 photographs, meticulously stored. They were pictures of Marcus and a woman named Clara Sewell. They were on beaches in mountains holding hands, laughing. There were photos of them with children, then grandchildren. For 40 years, every time Marcus left on one of his annual business trips, he was with her. They had built a whole life, a parallel universe of joy and intimacy, while I spent 14,600 days in the echoing silence of our home, a wife in name only. The discovery didn't bring rage. It brought a chilling final clarity. I had been a placeholder, a penance. The weight of it, the sheer waste of my existence, crushed the last breath from my lungs. I died with that bitterness in my throat. And then I opened my eyes. The scent of cheap floral perfume and antiseptic filled my nose. Sunlight, weak and pale, streamed through a window I hadn't seen in decades. I was in my old dormitory room at the co-op. My hands, smooth and unlined, flew to my face. I stumbled to the small mirror on the wall. Staring back at me was my 20-year-old self, her eyes wide with a terror and knowledge that did not belong there. It was 1985. I was back in the year my life had been shattered. The memory of that night, the one that branded me, surged forward. My birthday. Marcus Thorne, my fiancé, had finally asked me out to a movie. I had waited at the cinema from 7 until 11. My hope curdling into a cold, hard fear. He never came. On the long, dark walk back to the dorm, 3 drunken men had dragged me into a grove by the road. I fought. I bit and scratched. I was covered in bruises, my clothes torn to shreds, but my virtue by some miracle had remained intact. A group of night shift workers had heard my screams and scared them off. But no one believed that. The story that spread was that Alara Vance had been violated, ruined, damaged goods. The whispers followed me like a shroud. And Marcus, in a grand display of guilt-ridden nobility, had offered to marry me. He said if he hadn't stood me up for a sudden mission, it never would have happened. He was my savior, my lifeline. I clung to him and we married. I knew now the truth. There had been no mission. His diary, which I read 40 years too late, confessed it all. He had been with Clara that night watching a meteor shower. My tragedy was merely an inconvenient backdrop for his romance. Standing in that dorm room, feeling the youthful strength in my limbs and the ancient sorrow in my soul, I made a decision. This time I would not accept a life of quiet despair. I would not marry Marcus Thorne. I would take the shame they tried to force on me and let it fall like water from a stone. I washed my face, dressed in my simple, modest clothes, and walked out into the morning air. I was going to the military base to break off the engagement. The walk was a surreal journey through a forgotten world. The sights and sounds of 1985 were both familiar and strange. When I reached the gates of the base, my heart was a steady, determined drum, not the frantic flutter it used to be. I hadn't taken 10 steps onto the grounds when I heard the tittering. A group of nurses from the base clinic were clustered nearby, their uniforms crisp, their faces sharp with malice. Clara Sewell was among them, the prettiest woman in the medical unit, already weaving her web around Marcus. Well, if it isn't the great disgrace herself, one of them sneered, her voice carrying like a dart. Back again to pester Captain Thorne into marrying you? Another chimed in. Got yourself sullied and still have the nerve to cling to him? Shameless. If that had happened to me, I'd have drowned myself already. Their words were the same as they had been before, but this time they didn't pierce my heart. They were just noise. I was the victim. The filth wasn't on me. It was in their mouths and their mean little hearts. I kept walking, my head high. Alara Vance, stop right there. Clara Sewell stepped directly into my path, arms crossed, looking down her perfect nose at me. Are you deaf? Didn't you hear us? Do you have no shame? Or are you like a dead pig that doesn't fear boiling water? I said nothing. I just looked at her, this woman who would secretly share my husband for 4 decades. If I were you, she continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy, I'd break up with Captain Thorne myself. Stop using the fact that you were assaulted as moral blackmail to force him to marry you. That's no different from begging. Captain Thorne has a bright future. If he really marries a withered, ruined woman like you, he'll never be able to hold his head high. She smiled, a smug, triumphant little curve of her lips. You were violated because your fate was cheap. You can't blame anyone else. I'm the one who truly matches Captain Thorne. I've already been accepted into Capital Medical University. After I graduate, I won't be just a nurse. I'll be a medical officer. What do you have to compare with me? The other nurses murmured their agreement. Yeah, what decent man would take someone like her home? I stayed silent, not out of fear but because I had no interest in fighting over a man I no longer wanted. In my past life, both she and I had treated Marcus like a treasure. The result was that I suffered my whole life and she spent hers sneaking around in the shadows. Now that I had returned, I was letting them have each other. Clara, I said, my voice calm and clear. I'm here to break off the engagement with Captain Thorne. Her eyes widened in disbelief. You'd really give him up? As she spoke, she took a step forward, then suddenly stumbled into me, collapsing to the ground with a theatrical cry of pain. Oh, that hurts. Her performance was perfectly timed. Marcus Thorne was already striding toward us, his handsome face dark with anger. He was just as I remembered him from his youth, tall, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence that had once made my heart skip a beat. Now it left me cold. Clara, are you okay? He asked, his voice full of concern. He scooped her up in a princess carry, a gesture he had never once offered me in 40 years of marriage. I'm fine, Clara whimpered, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. I just slipped on my own. It has nothing to do with Alara. The more she defended me, the angrier Marcus became. He turned his glare on me. Alara, I know you've been unhappy ever since that incident. But you can't take your emotions out on an innocent person. I'm the one who owes you. What does Clara have to do with it? He continued his lecture, his words a familiar blend of condescension and self-pity. After your incident, Clara cared about you, asked after you, comforted you, and this is how you treat her? Don't you think you're being an ungrateful wolf? Doesn't your conscience hurt? You've really disappointed me with your attitude. He finished with his usual threat. I've already agreed to marry you, so stop pushing your luck and taking an inch when I give you a mile. In my past life, this speech would have shattered me. It would have sent me into a spiral of self-loathing, desperate to win back his approval. Now I just looked at him, at the face I had loved for a lifetime, and felt nothing but a vast empty pity for the girl I used to be. Marcus Thorne, I said, my voice cutting through his tirade. I'm not marrying you. Let's cancel our engagement. The words hung in the air, simple and absolute. The gossiping nurses fell silent. Clara's fake tears stopped in shock. Marcus stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign tongue. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked away, leaving the ghost of my old life behind me. The first step on my new path was taken. I was free. Part 2, Forging a New Path. The silence that followed my declaration was more potent than any of their insults. I didn't look back. I felt their stares, Marcus's bewildered fury, Clara's shocked calculation, the nurses' gaping mouths, boring into my back, but I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, until the base was behind me. My next destination was the Supply and Marketing Cooperative Dormitory, the tiny room that was my only sanctuary in this city. But as I approached, I saw a familiar, unwelcome figure waiting for me. Mrs. Thorne, Marcus's mother, stood with her pinched, disapproving face. Beside her was a man in his 40s with a shifty, greasy look that made my skin crawl. I remembered him from my last life. Leo Dawson from the feed factory. Alara, you're back, Mrs. Thorne said, her voice unervingly pleasant. This was the woman who usually greeted me with a cold stare or a critical remark about my rural background. Her false warmth was more alarming than her usual disdain. This is Leo Dawson from the feed factory, she announced as if presenting a prize. He makes 32 yuan a month. In 1985, that was a significant income. His wife passed away a few years ago and he has a child. If you marry him, you'll be the mistress of the house. There was her real intention laid bare. In my past life, she had pulled this same stunt, trying to pawn me off on an undesirable man to clear the path for Clara. Back then, Marcus had been the one to refuse on my behalf, a gesture I had mistaken for care. Now I had to fight my own battles. I'm not marrying him, I said, my voice flat and firm. Mrs. Thorne's mask of civility shattered. Her eyes narrowed. You've already been sullied. What right do you have to be picky? My son won't marry damaged goods. Leo doesn't mind you, so you should consider yourself lucky to marry a state-owned factory worker. Leo Dawson's eyes raked over me with a greedy leer. He stepped closer, his breath smelling of tobacco and something sour. Let's talk inside, he slurred, his intent clear. He was a vile man. In my last life he had harassed me constantly, believing that because I was ruined, I was an easy target. He never wanted to marry me, he just wanted to use me. To you on a night. How about it? He whispered now, his voice a disgusting smirk. I heard you're pretty fresh. Still can handle some fun. I want to try. Revulsion, cold and sharp, shot through me. Without a second thought, my hand flew out and connected with his face in a sharp crack. The sound echoed in the quiet street. Get out of here, I said, my voice low and shaking with a fury that spanned 2 lifetimes, or I'm calling the police. Leo Dawson, clutching his reddening cheek, stared at me in shock before scrambling away. Mrs. Thorne's expression turned to pure venom. Alara Vance, she spat. Let me make myself clear. We don't want trash for a daughter-in-law. The only one I accept is Clara Sewell. Then it's a good thing I've released him from his obligation, I replied, and before she could unleash another torrent of abuse, I walked past her and into the dormitory, shutting the door firmly on her outraged sputtering. The days that followed were a blessed, quiet reprieve. I never went to see Marcus again. I threw myself into my work at the cooperative during the day, and in the evenings I enrolled in night school. The goal that had crystallized in my mind was my only focus: the college entrance exam. The cooperative's director, Mr. Sewell, Clara's father, was a portly, self-important man who wielded significant power in a time when coveted goods like bicycles and sewing machines passed through his hands. He took great pleasure in mocking my ambitions. Huh. You think you can get into college? He chortled one day, his belly shaking with laughter. A barnyard hen turning into a phoenix? I ignored him. His croaking was insignificant. In my past life I had followed Marcus to his army post and worked as a teacher. To better myself I had taken self-study exams, eventually earning both a bachelor's and a master's degree. I had personally tutored hundreds of students, guiding them into top universities. All that knowledge, all those years of accumulated learning had come back with me. The textbooks in front of me weren't new challenges, they were old friends. I studied not for a passing grade but for a statement. Time, which had once dragged its feet through 40 years of loneliness, now seemed to fly. Soon it was the day of the college entrance exam. Clara and I were assigned to the same testing site. I went alone, carrying my own pen and a heart full of resolve. She, however, arrived with an entourage, her parents and, to my slight annoyance, Marcus Thorne. When he saw me, his expression shifted through a series of emotions: surprise, awkwardness, and finally a familiar, condescending frown. Alara, he said, striding over. You're really here to take the exam. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Don't waste the country's test papers, okay? You'll never pass. I already told you I'd marry you. Stop with this nonsense. He was about to continue his lecture, but I held up a hand, stopping him cold. Captain Thorne, I said, my voice quiet but clear. The night at the cinema. Were you really on a mission? His face froze. A flicker of panic, quickly suppressed, flashed in his eyes. He hadn't been. He had been with Clara watching a meteor shower. I had learned this ugly truth from his private diary, a secret he had kept for 40 years. That discovery had been the final nail in the coffin of my love for him. You don't need to rack your brain lying to me anymore, I continued, seeing the guilt in his rigid posture. We have nothing to do with each other. I turned to walk into the exam hall, but Clara caught up to me, her face a mask of spiteful challenge. Alara, she hissed, whoever scores lower will back out on their own. I didn't even bother to reply. I just walked into the hall, found my seat, and when the test paper was placed in front of me, I picked up my pen. This wasn't just an exam, it was my declaration of independence. A month later, the results were to be released. In an age before the internet, the admissions list was handwritten on giant red posters and displayed in the city square. The air was thick with anticipation. Drums and gongs sounded, and dragon and lion dancers weaved through the crowd. A buzz ran through everyone. Our city had produced the top scorer in the entire province. The square was more packed and festive than I had ever seen it. The list was already posted on the wall, but covered by a red silk cloth, waiting for the director of the Education Bureau to make the official unveiling at noon. I saw them all there, gathered like a proud family unit, the Sewells and the Thorns. They stood near the podium, beaming with proprietary pride, already accepting the congratulations being showered upon them. "The top scorer must be Clara," someone said loudly. "That girl is smart and beautiful." "Ha, the Sewell family is truly blessed, and so is the Thorn family," another added. Their mutual admiration society was in full swing when they noticed me approaching. Their expressions instantly soured into looks of pure disdain, as if I were a stray dog that had wandered into a wedding banquet. Marcus detached himself from the group and came over to me. His tone was that of a man delivering a difficult but necessary truth. "When you see your name isn't on the list," he said, "try to keep your composure. Don't get too upset. Clara is a top student who's been reviewing for 2 years. You can't compare to her." Clara, seeing him speak to me, flushed with anger. Impatience and arrogance got the better of her. Unable to wait for the official ceremony, she suddenly rushed forward, grabbed the edge of the red silk and yanked it down. The list was revealed. The square, which had been a roar of noise, fell into a stunned hush. Then a wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. People weren't looking at the middle or bottom of the list. Every eye was glued to the very top line. "What? The top scorer is her. Was there a mistake? Well, I've seen everything now. Truly, the world is full of surprises." I didn't need to push through the crowd. I could see it clearly from where I stood. There, in bold black calligraphy, was the top line. Alara Vance. Total score, 689. Admitted to Capital University. Clara was frozen solid, her hand still clutching the red silk. Her face was a parchment of disbelief. How can the top scorer be Alara Vance? Her voice was a broken whisper. "Isn't she that disgrace?" She began to mutter, her lips trembling. "Impossible. Impossible." Her eyes, wild with panic, darted down the list, desperately searching for her own name. She went down the list once, twice, a third time. It wasn't there. She had failed. The double blow, my stunning success and her utter failure, was too much for her. Her composure, always so carefully maintained, shattered. "It's fake," she shrieked, her voice rising hysterically above the crowd's murmur. "It has to be a mistake. How could Alara be the top scorer? And why isn't my name here?" Her parents and relatives surged forward, creating a commotion. "What's going on?" Mr. Sewell boomed. "The person copying the list must have made a mistake. How could someone like her be the top scorer? If she can get into Capital University, pigs can climb trees. Our Claire is so outstanding. There's no way she failed." Marcus was staring at me, his face a comical mix of shock and confusion. He looked from the list to my face and back again. This can't be a coincidence, right, Alara?" he stammered. "Are these really your results? Did you actually apply to Capital University yourself?" He seemed to need my confirmation, as if the evidence in front of his eyes wasn't enough. His parents stayed silent, but their eyes were darting around, clearly recalculating my worth. I didn't answer him. I didn't scream with joy or cry tears of happiness. I simply stood there, quiet and still, savoring the moment. In my mind, it was like a film playing back, every bit of the bitterness and pain from 2 lifetimes flashing before my eyes. This moment, this undeniable public victory, was the true beginning of my rebirth. The unhappy memories of the past could finally be laid to rest. From now on, my heart would hold only happiness and hope. The director of the Education Bureau arrived, and the crowd parted for him. He ignored the weeping Clara and the sputtering Sewells and walked directly to me. "You must be Alara Vance, right?" he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Congratulations. You're the pride of our entire city." He announced to the whole square that I was the provincial top scorer and that the city's top leaders were waiting to meet me. I was ushered toward a waiting 212 Jeep, a vehicle of immense prestige. As I climbed in, I caught one last glimpse of the crowd, Clara's tear-streaked face of rage, Marcus's stunned disbelief, the Thorns' bewildered frustration. The Jeep pulled away, carrying me through the streets of the city I was about to leave behind. I looked out the window at the passing buildings, my heart lighter than it had ever been. I knew with a certainty that sang in my blood, that this was the road to my new life. Part 3 to 8 will continue the story of Alara's life at Capital University, her encounter with a new love interest, and the final unraveling of Marcus and Clara's schemes. Part 3, The Prize and the Poison. The Jeep ride was a blur of smiling officials and waving crowds. I was received in a government building whose polished floors and stern portraits had once intimidated me. Now they were just scenery. The men in suits shook my hand, their words of praise flowing over me. Reporters asked questions, their cameras flashing. How does it feel to be the first provincial top scorer from our city? What are your secrets for success? I gave polite, modest answers, but my mind was elsewhere. The true prize, the one that mattered most to me, was the scholarship. 1,000 yuan. In 1985, it was a fortune. For a state factory worker, it was 3 years' net income. For me, it was freedom. Tuition at Capital University was cheap, only a few dozen yuan a year, but living expenses in the capital were another matter. My family was not wealthy and I had no intention of being a burden. This money was my bridge to a self-sufficient future. I wrote home telling my parents 2 things. I was going to Capital University, and I had broken off my engagement with Marcus Thorne. Their initial response, as I expected, was panic. My mother's letter was a mess of underlined words and exclamation points. A regimental commander. A stroke of incredible fortune. You are a fool to give it up. I didn't argue. I simply waited. Soon enough, the news of my scholarship and my status as the pride of the city reached our village. Their next letter was different. The tone was sheepish, admitting they lacked vision. They conceded that since I was an adult, my life decisions were my own to make. The relief I felt was profound. The first threads tying me to my old life had been cut. What I did not expect was for the Thorns to reappear, their faces arranged into grotesque caricatures of warmth. Mrs. Thorne stood at my dormitory door, clutching a bag of fruit and pastries, her smile strained. "Alara, our good daughter-in-law," she trilled, her voice like grating metal. "To have you marry into our family, it must be the blessing of our ancestors." I stared at her, this woman who days before had called me trash, to my face. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless for a moment. I had lived with them in my past life. I knew their opportunistic, selfish hearts. When they looked down on you, you were a disgrace, a jinx. When they thought you were useful, you became a precious treasure they had found. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," I said, my voice cool and firm, cutting through her false cheer. "I'm here to cancel the engagement." The warmth vanished from her face like a snuffed candle. Mr. Thorne, who had been hovering behind her, stepped forward, his jowls quivering with indignation. "Ha," he barked. "So, you think you're so great just because you're the top scorer? Now you're saying our Marcus isn't good enough for you? If it weren't for our family's influence in the provincial capital, you wouldn't be where you are today. You're nothing but an ungrateful wolf." They hurled their insults for a moment longer before storming off in a fury, leaving the pastries on the ground. I closed the door, my hands steady. Their words were just noise. Not long after, Marcus himself came. He looked different, less assured, almost sheepish. In all the years I'd known him, this was the first time he had ever brought me a gift. It was a brand new notebook and a hero fountain pen. On the first page, in his neat, square handwriting, he had written, "Study hard, work diligently, and dedicate your youth to the early realization of the 4 modernizations." Beneath it was his signature. "I don't want it," I said, refusing the gift before he could even fully extend it. "I sincerely want to congratulate you," he said, his cheeks flushing. "I don't need your congratulations." I folded my arms. "You should spend more time checking on Clara Sewell instead." His face tightened. "This autumn, Clara's been having a rough time." He explained how, in the 1980s, you had to list your university choices before knowing your score. Clara, in her overconfidence, had listed only top-tier schools like Capital Medical University. Her score had fallen short by more than 20 points. She had refused to accept placement elsewhere and had thus failed to get in entirely. She reacted poorly, Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. Stormed the admissions office, made a scene. Got a harsh criticism for it. He sighed. "She's poured all her anger onto you. She's been telling people you cheated." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Her jealousy had stripped away her reason and no one was listening to her ravings. "I'm telling you, Alara," Marcus insisted, his gaze intense. "Claire and I are clean. We're just comrades." It was the same line I had heard for 40 years. A wave of nausea washed over me. "Marcus Thorne," I interrupted, my voice flat. "Unless you've lost your memory, you should remember I broke off our engagement. I was the one who dumped you. I don't want you anymore." "Alara, he began, but before he could finish, 2 policemen appeared at my door. Their presence sent a jolt of cold dread through me, a remnant of a lifetime of fearing authority. "Alara Vance," one of them said, his tone official. "There's been a theft at the Supply and Marketing Cooperative. Please come with us to assist in the investigation." "What theft?" Marcus was immediately on alert, stepping slightly in front of me, a protective gesture that felt both patronizing and far too late. "The director, Mr. Sewell, reported that more than 500 yuan went missing from the counter. He suspects Alara of stealing it." I listened quietly, my initial fear solidifying into a cold, hard certainty. I hadn't done it. This was Clara's desperate, final move. She and her father were trying to frame me, to ruin my reputation and my chance at Capital University. "Fine," I said, my voice calm. "I'll go with you. The innocent have nothing to fear." Marcus panicked. "Officers, you must be mistaken. Alara isn't the kind of person to steal. I can vouch for her." His defense, while well-intentioned, was irrelevant. One of the officers nodded. "Don't worry. We won't wrong an innocent person and we won't let a guilty one go." At the station, the investigation was swift. There were no security cameras in those days, but the officers were sharp. They knew I had just received a 1,000 yuan prize. I had a bright future. The motive was flimsy, the accusation reeked of personal grievance. It didn't take them long to clear me of all suspicion. Under further questioning, Mr. Sewell cracked. The investigation uncovered numerous instances of him using his position for personal gain, embezzling and taking bribes. The man who had tried to frame me was arrested and charged. "This was all Mr. Sewell's idea," Marcus told me later, having made a special trip to my dorm to explain. "It had nothing to do with Clara. She didn't know anything. Please don't blame her." I looked at him, this man who was so determined to see purity in his comrade. I gave him a small, bitter smile. "Marcus," I said softly, "why is it that every time something bad happens she's always innocent?" The question hung in the air, a boomerang of his own lifelong excuse. He was left gaping, utterly speechless. "You should go," I said, turning away. "I need to start packing for Capital University." "When do you leave?" he asked, a note of desperation in his voice. "I'll see you off." I shook my head, the movement final. "No need. If I didn't plan to see you again, then there was no reason for a farewell." Part 4. The Whistle in the Library. The day I left for Capital University, the train platform was a chaos of steam, tears and shouted goodbyes. I stood alone, a single suitcase holding all my worldly possessions and my hard-won freedom. I kept my eyes forward, not looking for him, and felt no disappointment when he didn't appear. But as the train began to pull out, its wheels groaning against the tracks, I saw him. Marcus was sprinting down the platform, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, sweat pouring down his face. He was shouting, his words lost in the roar of the departing engine. He chased the train for 100 meters, his arm waving frantically before he was left behind, a shrinking figure of regret. I leaned back in my seat, the image of his desperate run already fading. I guessed he had been delayed by Clara again, some new crisis. But the thought had no power to hurt me anymore. It was just a fact. University life was a revelation. Capital University was a world of sprawling campuses, ancient libraries and buzzing lecture halls. The energy was intoxicating. My greatest surprise, however, came during military training. Our instructor was a man named Colonel Jean Falkren. From the moment he took the parade ground, he became the silent obsession of every female student on campus. He was tall, with a lean, powerful build and eyes that held a startling intensity. He moved with a predator's grace, and his voice, when he gave commands, was low and carried an undeniable authority. I remembered Marcus once telling me, back when he participated in an all-army martial arts competition, that Colonel Jean was his idol. He was the commander of the newly formed Elite Falcon Special Forces. During training, Colonel Jean was strict and unyielding. A misplaced step or a sloppy salute earned a sharp correction. But after the drills ended, I began to see a different man. Every evening, I would see him in the university library, surrounded by stacks of foreign journals and technical manuals, his brow furrowed in concentration. I later learned he came to Capital University specifically for our library's extensive collection of foreign publications. A strong military depends on strong science and technology, he told one of the deans, and I happened to be walking by. The earnest conviction in his voice struck me. One evening, emboldened by my second chance at life, I approached his table. "Colonel Jean," I said, my voice slightly tentative, "I noticed you're reading a lot of English material. I'm proficient in English. I could help you with translation if you'd like." He looked up, his sharp eyes assessing me. He hadn't expected this. My English, honed over 2 lifetimes of study and teaching, was one of my greatest assets. I had, after all, earned a perfect score on the English section of the college entrance exam, a near-mythical feat in the 1980s. He handed me a dense article on radar technology. "Translate this paragraph," he said, a challenge in his gaze. I scanned it, then began to translate aloud, not just word for word, but conveying the technical concepts with clarity and precision. His expression shifted from skeptical to impressed. "Your English is exceptional," he stated, a note of genuine respect in his voice. After that, our collaboration began. When training ended, he continued to come to the library on weekends. I helped him translate research papers, technical specifications, and military journals. We spent hours huddled over texts, our heads bent together. We grew closer, our conversations slowly expanding beyond translation to discussions about history, philosophy, and our hopes for the future. Rumors, of course, began to fly. Whispers followed us across campus. I felt a familiar flush of embarrassment, worried that my tarnished past would somehow stain him. "Colonel Jean," I said one day, my cheeks warm, "people are starting to talk." He didn't even look up from the schematic he was studying. "It's fine," he said, his voice calm. "People can say what they want. It's their mouths." His simple, unshakable confidence was a balm to my soul. During this time, I also received letters from Marcus. The first one began, "Elara, how are you doing at Capital University? Have you gotten used to it there? I'm sorry I didn't see you off the day you left. After Clara's father was arrested, her mental state has been unstable. She fell ill that day and I had to stay with her. When I'm done with these matters, I'll come visit you at Capital University." I didn't bother reading the rest. I tossed the letter, unopened, into the wastepaper basket. That winter break I didn't go home. Colonel Jean, who had asked me to call him Falkran in private, was working on a major paper and I was his dedicated research assistant. He applied for permission to stay in a guest room on campus. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, eating our meals together in the nearly empty cafeteria, spending our days and evenings in the quiet sanctuary of the library lounge. Our feelings, unspoken but palpable, deepened with every shared silence, every finished page. I realized with a sense of awe that despite having lived 2 lives, this was the first time I was truly, deeply falling in love. But a shadow remained. I didn't dare confess. Falkran was too exceptional and I still carried the ghost of my past, the stain that everyone in my hometown believed was there. One evening I went to the cafeteria to pick up dinner for both of us. As I walked out, balancing 2 containers of food, a figure stepped directly into my path. It was Marcus Thorne. He looked ruined. The proud, crisp captain was gone. He was unshaven, his uniform was rumpled, and his eyes were shadowed with desperation. "Elara," he said, his smile a bitter, broken thing. "I came to see you." "I'm fine," I replied, my voice flat. "You don't need to check on me." I tried to walk past him, but he moved to block me again. "Elara, I was wrong." The admission seemed to cost him dearly. "I only realized your worth after you left." His voice grew intense, solemn. "Can we not break up? I've realized you're the woman most suited for me." Sounded like a pathetic joke. "Captain Thorne," I said, emphasizing his rank, "you should be saying that to your soulmate. My engagement was the only thing keeping you from the woman you love. Now I've stepped aside. You face no obstacles. You should marry her right away. I won't be sending a wedding gift, but I do sincerely wish you both a long life together." My words were genuine, devoid of sarcasm. But Marcus's face flushed a dark, mottled red. Don't mention that woman, he shouted, his composure shattering. That so-called soulmate is a curse. She ruined my future. He told me a sordid tale. A month ago, the Falcon Special Forces had held a national selection. He had signed up and taken first place in the cross-country event. He had been elated. But the post-competition inspection revealed he had tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. His results were nullified. He was publicly criticized and demoted from company commander to platoon leader. He was furious, insisting he knew nothing about the drugs. The investigation revealed that Clara, wanting him to succeed so she could bask in his reflected glory, had secretly tampered with his water. She wanted to help and instead she destroyed my career, he raged. She was expelled from the medical unit because of it. That's going too far, I said, a genuine pang of sympathy for his ruined prospects hitting me. How could she stoop so low? But then the memories of my past life surfaced. Of his secret life with her, of my decades of loneliness. I looked at his anguished face and felt nothing but a distant pity. Platoon leader Thorne, I said evenly, I'm sure Clara must be innocent. She wouldn't have drugged you on purpose. After all, she's so kind and pure. You should forgive her. My words, a perfect echo of his own lifelong excuses, were a boomerang that left him utterly speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't wait for a response. Thinking of Falkren, probably hungry in the library, I turned to leave. But Marcus wasn't done. He hurried after me. Alara, I know you like me. You were just jealous of Clara before. Now that I've come to my senses, don't be mad anymore, okay? His voice was pleading now, pathetic. You've been waiting for me. Otherwise, why would you, unlike so many other college students, still come to the cafeteria alone without a boyfriend? I turned on him, my patience finally snapping. I already have someone I like, I seethed. Don't flatter yourself. Who? He demanded, his eyes flashing with a possessive fire I knew all too well. Let me see him. I don't believe there's anyone better than me, more suited for you. Before he could finish his arrogant pronouncement, a cool, authoritative voice cut through the tense air behind me. Is that so? Then let's compare. I turned to see Falkren standing there, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Marcus. He looked every inch the Special Forces commander. Who's talking so big? Falkren said, his voice deceptively quiet. Alara is my woman. No one's taking her from me. Marcus bristled, ready to argue, but when he got a clear look at Falkren's face, he froze. His military training kicked in instantly. He snapped to attention, his body rigid, and saluted. Good day, Commander. Falkren gave a casual wave. No need to salute, he said. But don't harass my girlfriend again. With that he stepped forward, took my hand in his, a gesture of stunning possessiveness and care, and under Marcus's shocked, bewildered and utterly defeated gaze, he led me away toward the library. Once we were out of sight, my heart hammering against my ribs, I tried to pull my hand free, my face burning. All right, I stammered, you can let go now. We don't need to keep acting. I assumed he had only pretended for my benefit to drive Marcus away. He stopped walking and turned to face me. His grip on my hand tightened, not painfully but firmly, surely. Who said I was acting? His dark eyes were serious, his gaze unwavering. I like you. This is real. He brought my hand up, holding it between both of his. Once I hold your hand, he said, his voice a low, solemn vow, I'm never letting go. I want to hold it for the rest of my life. Tears pricked at my eyes, but this time, they were tears of a joy so profound it felt like a healing balm. My face flushed, my heart overflowing, I could only nod. And so Jean Falkren and I began to date, while Marcus Thorne, his pride and career in tatters, slunk away into the Beijing night, finally and irrevocably part of my past. Part 5 will cover the aftermath of Marcus's visit, the spreading of malicious rumors, and how Falkren helps Alara clear her name completely. Part 5. The Slander and the Sword. The world narrowed to the warmth of Falkren's hand around mine. The feel of his skin, calloused and sure, was an anchor in the storm of my emotions. We walked in silence for a long moment, the sounds of the campus fading into a distant hum. You don't have to say it back, he said finally, his voice softer now, meant only for me. I just needed you to know my intentions are serious. I looked up at him, at the sharp, honest lines of his profile under the dimming sky. I'm Complicated, Falkren, I whispered, the ghost of my past rising between us. My history, there are things people say. He stopped and turned to face me fully. I've heard whispers, he admitted, his gaze never leaving mine. But I judge by what I see. And I see a woman of immense strength, intelligence, and integrity. The rest is just noise. It was the simplest, most powerful validation I had ever received. In my previous life, Marcus's acceptance had always been conditional, tinged with pity and a barely concealed disgust. Falkren's was absolute. He saw me, not the stain others had tried to impose. For the next few weeks, I existed in a state of breathless happiness. My studies flourished, and my time with Falkren was a series of quiet discoveries, shared meals, walks through the university grounds, and long hours in the library where our work was now punctuated by stolen glances and soft smiles. He was a man of few words, but each one was deliberate, each action thoughtful. He was nothing like the boyish, self-absorbed Marcus I had once loved. But the past, it seemed, was a predator with a long memory. It struck on a crisp autumn morning. I was on my way to a lecture when I noticed the clusters of students, their heads together, casting furtive glances my way. The air was thick with a familiar, ugly energy. Then I saw them. Big character posters, plastered on notice boards and walls across the campus. They were vividly illustrated with crude drawings. The text described in lascivious detail how Ilara Vance, a student from the provinces, had been assaulted by several thugs before coming to the university. It slandered me as a loose woman who had used immoral means to secure her top scorer status and her place at Capital U. The words were a poison meticulously crafted to destroy everything I had built. A cold dread, ancient and familiar, washed over me. The whispers of my hometown had followed me here to this sanctuary. I felt the eyes of my peers, their curiosity turning to judgment and scorn. The confident woman I had become began to shrink, threatened by the shadow of the victim I had been. I didn't go to my lecture. I turned and ran, my vision blurring, not stopping until I reached the sanctuary of the library lounge where Falkren and I often worked. He was there waiting for me. He took one look at my ashen face and knew. Without a word, he stood and strode out. I sank into a chair, my body trembling. The walls I had built so carefully felt like they were crumbling. How could I outrun this? How could I ever be free? Falkren returned 20 minutes later, his expression a mask of controlled fury. He had seen the posters. He came to me, knelt before my chair and took my shaking hands in his. Look at me, Ilara. I forced my tear-filled eyes to meet his. The storm in his gaze had quieted, replaced by a deep, unwavering certainty. Jean Chong, I choked out, using his formal name in my distress. I need you to know. I wasn't violated. My body is still pure. I fought them and people came before they could. Do you believe me? The question was a plea, the same one I had never dared to ask Marcus because I knew his answer would always be doubt. Falkren's hands tightened around mine. Silly girl, he said, his voice so gentle it broke what was left of my composure. He reached up and wiped a tear from my cheek with his thumb. Whether or not you were physically harmed, you will always be pure and flawless in my heart. What was taken from you was your peace, not your worth. And we will get that peace back. I threw myself into his arms then, weeping freely, great heaving sobs that came from a wound 40 years deep. He held me, his embrace a fortress against the world. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, my wounded heart felt truly, completely safe. He did not offer empty comfort. He offered a sword. That very afternoon he went to the university administration and the local public security bureau. He used his considerable influence not to suppress the issue, but to demand a formal investigation to clear my name. He argued that this was not just a personal attack, but a malicious attempt to slander a national-level scholarship recipient and a student of Capital University. Then he did something that left me speechless. He took a month's leave. He told me he was going on a training exercise, but I later learned the truth. He went back to my provincial capital. For 4 weeks he stalked the seedy underbelly of the city, asking questions, following leads. He was a predator hunting other predators. He finally found them, the 3 thugs from that night, catching them in the act of assaulting another young woman in the same grove by the road. The justice he delivered was swift and brutal. He beat them half to death before hauling their broken bodies to the police station. Under official interrogation with the weight of a military colonel and the evidence of a new crime upon them, they broke. They confessed to the attack on me, confirming every detail I had always claimed, that they had dragged me into the grove, that I had fought them ferociously, and that they had been driven away by passers-by before they could complete their intended violation. The police issued an official statement, exonerating me completely. The Public Security Bureau sent a formal notice to Capital University, stating that Alara Vance was the victim of a violent crime and her character was without blemish. The vindication was a tidal wave that washed the filth from my name. The posters disappeared overnight. The whispers turned to murmurs of sympathy and outrage on my behalf. The university, embarrassed by the whole affair, issued its own statement condemning the character assassination. I loved Falkren for many things in the years that followed, but I never loved him more than I did for that month he spent in the shadows, fighting a battle I thought I would have to carry alone forever. The investigation into the posters quickly led back to the source, Clara Sewell. Her hatred for me had festered into a madness that stripped away all caution. She had taken a train to the capital and plastered the slander herself. Word reached me through the gossiping channels that somehow always know these things, that Marcus had finally had a complete and final falling out with her over it. The last thread of his illusion about her purity had snapped. And Clara, with nothing left to lose, gave up all pretense. She began openly telling people about her long-standing affair with Marcus, demanding that he, a ruined man, now take responsibility for her. Trapped by his own compromised career and her relentless pressure, Marcus had no choice. He retired from the army in disgrace. His dreams of the Falcon Special Forces turned to dust. He and Clara returned to our hometown, bound together not by love, but by a toxic stew of regret, resentment, and mutual destruction. For the next 40 years I heard they remained locked in a miserable on-again off-again relationship, a perpetual cycle of hurting and being hurt, their lives a quiet, ruined echo of the future I had once endured. As for me, I stood on the steps of the library, the official clearance document in my hand, and looked out at a campus that no longer felt hostile. The stain was gone. The weight was lifted. I was clean. I was free. Falkren came to stand beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We just stood there side by side watching the sun set over the city that held our future. Part 6. A Foundation of Trust. The clearing of my name acted like a baptism. The last vestiges of my old timid self were washed away, leaving behind a woman of unshakable confidence. My academic work, once a means to an end, became a passion. I thrived in the challenging environment of Capital University, my unique perspective from a former life allowing me to grasp complex concepts with an ease that impressed my professors. My relationship with Falkren deepened into a profound partnership. We were two halves of a whole. His strategic, disciplined mind complemented my intuitive, empathetic one. He continued his research at the university, our translation projects evolving into collaborative efforts. I helped him not only with language but also in analyzing and synthesizing the foreign technologies, my teacher's mind skilled at breaking down complex ideas. One weekend we were walking through a quiet park, the fallen leaves crunching under our feet. He was quiet, more contemplative than usual. "Is something on your mind, Falkren?" I asked, linking my arm with his. He stopped, turning to face me. "My unit is being deployed for an extended training exercise," he said. "In the border region. It will be 6 months. Maybe longer." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. 6 months. The memory of Marcus's constant lengthy business trips, that were actually rendezvous with Clara, flashed unbidden in my mind. It was an irrational fear, I knew. Falkren was not Marcus. But the ghost of that betrayal was a stubborn one. I must have flinched because his eyes softened with understanding. He cupped my face in his hands. "This is my duty, Alara. It is not a choice. It is who I am." "I know," I whispered, my voice thick. "It's just a long time." "It is," he agreed. "And during that time I will have no outside communication. It's a blackout for operational security." The knot tightened. No letters. No news. Just silence and uncertainty. He searched my face. "This is the hardest part of being with a soldier. The waiting. The not knowing. I will understand if it is too much for you to bear." His words were offered as a gift of freedom, but they felt like a test. He was giving me an out before he left, before the silence began. He was a man of honor and he would not ask me to chain myself to a ghost. I looked at him, at this man who had fought for my honor without being asked, who saw my soul as pure and flawless, who wanted to hold my hand for a lifetime. The fear of his absence was a small, shrill thing compared to the terrifying, glorious prospect of a life without him in it. I took a deep, steadying breath. Jean Falkren, I said, my voice clear and firm, banishing the ghost of Marcus Thorne back to the past where he belonged. You asked me once if I could wait for you. My answer is this: I am not waiting for you. I am building a life for us. You go and do your duty. I will be here building our foundation. And when you return, it will be ready for you. The relief and fierce joy that blossomed in his eyes was my reward. He pulled me into a crushing embrace, right there in the middle of the public park. Then I will have the greatest motivation in the world to come back to you, he murmured into my hair. The day he left was a stark contrast to my departure on the train. He was in full combat gear, his face a mask of professional focus. There were no frantic chases, no desperate shouts. There was just a final, searing look, a squeeze of my hand that promised a future, and then he was gone, swallowed up by a military truck with a dozen other grim-faced men. The silence descended. It was vast and profound. But it was not the lonely silence of my first life. It was a purposeful one. I had meant what I said. I was building. I threw myself into my studies with a new intensity. I took on extra courses. I began working on an independent research project, combining my historical knowledge with the technological insights I had gained from working with Falkren. I wrote to my family not with the desperate pleas for validation of my past life, but with confident updates about my academic achievements. I built a circle of friends, real ones who knew my true story and admired my resilience. Months passed. The seasons changed. There were moments of weakness, nights when the silence felt heavy and the fear would creep in. But I would remember his face, his vow, and I would return to my books, to my research, to the life I was constructing brick by brick. One afternoon, nearly 7 months after he had left, I was in the library, surrounded by stacks of paper for my research project. A shadow fell over my desk. I looked up, annoyed at the interruption. My heart stopped. He was thinner, tanned a deep bronze, and there was a new, harder edge to his gaze that hadn't been there before. But it was him. Jean Falkren. He was back. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me, his eyes drinking me in as if I were an oasis after a long desert journey. Then a slow, true smile spread across his face, the kind of smile I had only seen glimpses of before. "You're here," I breathed, stating the obvious, my own smile breaking through. "I told you I would be," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. His eyes scanned the mountain of work on my desk. "And it seems you were not idle." "I told you I would be building," I replied, my voice trembling with happiness. He reached into his pocket and placed a small, smooth gray stone on top of my papers. It was unremarkable except for a single white vein running through its center like a lightning bolt. "I found it at the highest point of our training ground," he said quietly. "I kept it in my pocket every day, to remind me of what I was coming back to." It was the most romantic, most perfectly him gesture I could have imagined. Not flowers or poetry, but a piece of the earth he had traversed, a tangible promise. He was home, and the foundation I had built was strong enough to hold us both. Part 7. The Proposal and the Past. Life with Falkren after his return was different. The tentative, exploratory phase of our relationship was over. We moved with a new, settled certainty. He secured a more permanent posting in Beijing, one that still involved strategic research but kept him from the front lines of deployment. We found a rhythm, a comfortable domesticity woven into the vibrant intellectual tapestry of university life. He never once spoke of the details of his mission, and I never asked. The hardened edge in his eyes slowly softened, replaced by a deep, abiding contentment when he was with me. We continued our work in the library, but now our collaboration felt like the work of a lifelong team. One evening we were in his small, Spartan apartment on the base. I was cooking a simple dinner, a skill I had honed out of necessity in my first life but now performed with joy. He was at the table reading over a report I had drafted for him. "This is excellent, Ilara," he said, looking up. "Your analysis of the potential applications is sharper than half the officers on my staff. Perhaps you should hire me," I joked, stirring the pot. I have a better position in mind for you, he said, his tone shifting. It was suddenly very quiet, the only sound the gentle simmer of the food. I turned to look at him. He had risen from his chair and was standing there, his posture unnaturally straight as if he were on parade. In his hand was a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. "Elara Vance," he began, his voice formal, yet filled with a warmth that made my knees weak. "You are the most unexpected and brilliant part of my life. You have a strength that humbles me and a heart that has healed my own. I have spent my life serving my country. Now, I wish to spend the rest of it building a home with you." He opened the box. Inside was not a diamond, but a simple, elegant band of polished gold. It was perfect. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This was not a marriage of pity, of guilt, of obligation. This was a marriage of choice, of respect, of deep, abiding love. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, my voice clear and sure. "Yes, Jean Falkren, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled me into his arms and kissed me, a kiss that held the promise of a future I had never dared to dream of in either of my lives. We were married in a simple, civil ceremony. There were no frills, no crowds. My parents came, their faces filled with a pride I had never seen before. A few of my closest university friends attended, and on Falkren's side, a handful of his most trusted comrades from the Falcon unit, their respect for him evident in their stiff, formal congratulations to me. It was everything I had ever wanted and nothing I had ever had. As my new life blossomed, the echoes of my old one faded to distant murmurs. I completed my degree with highest honors and with Falkren's unwavering support began postgraduate work. We moved into a small house on the outskirts of the base, a place that was truly ours. Years turned into a decade. We were blessed with children. First a son with his father's intense eyes, then a daughter with my stubborn spirit. As I held my newborn daughter, I thought of the thousands of photos I had found of Marcus and Clara's secret family. There was no secrecy in my life. Our home was filled with laughter, with noise, with the messy, beautiful chaos of a family built on love. Falkren was a devoted father, his stern military discipline melting away into patient guidance and roughhousing play. He was the father I had wished for my children, the partner I had craved for myself. I never saw or spoke to Marcus Thorne again. But stories like water have a way of finding their own level. Through the intricate grapevine of army wives and hometown connections, I heard snippets. Marcus and Clara had never officially married. They lived in a state of perpetual toxic entanglement in our hometown. He drifted through a series of menial jobs, his spirit and ambition broken. Clara, it was said, had become a bitter, sharp-tongued woman, forever blaming him for her ruined prospects, and he, in turn, blamed her for his fallen career. They were prisoners of each other and of the past, a living cautionary tale of what my life could have been. One summer afternoon I was in our garden hanging laundry on the line. My son was chasing his sister, their shrieks of laughter filling the air. Falkren was due home any moment. The sun was warm on my back, the scent of clean linen and blooming jasmine in the air. I looked around me, at my children, at the home we had built, at the simple gold band on my finger, and a profound sense of peace settled over me. The long, lonely 40 years of my first life, the pain, the betrayal, the weight of the stain, it all seemed like a story I had read about someone else, a sad and distant fable. Happiness, I realized, was not a grand, dramatic event. It was not a title or a status. It was this. It was the simple, steadfast love of a good man. It was the sound of your children's laughter. It was the quiet confidence of a life lived on your own terms. It was the knowledge that after a long and arduous journey, I had finally truly come home. Part 8. 5 Generations. Time, which had once been my jailer, became my most gracious companion. It flowed around our family like a gentle river, carrying us from one season of joy to the next. Our children grew, their lives a testament to the stable, loving foundation Falkren and I had built. Our son, inheriting his father's sense of duty and my love for learning, graduated from a military academy and became an officer in the new modernized army his father had helped to shape. Our daughter, with a fierce independence I recognized from my own rebirth, became a doctor, her compassion a beacon in her work. I watched them forge their own paths, my heart swelling with a pride that was free from the anxieties of my first life. I had not passed on a legacy of shame or silence. I had given them a legacy of strength and choice. Falkren eventually retired from active service, his chest adorned with medals he rarely spoke of. He transitioned into a role as a senior military advisor and lecturer, his keen mind as sharp as ever. Our collaboration continued even into our silver years. We would sit for hours in our sun-drenched study, surrounded by books and the mementos of a full life, debating politics, history, and the latest scientific breakthroughs. The deep, intellectual bond that had first drawn us together only strengthened with time. The greatest joys, however, came with the next generations. The pitter-patter of little feet once again filled our home as grandchildren arrived. I would hold my grandson on my lap, his small hand patting my wrinkled cheek, and feel a connection to the future that was both humbling and exhilarating. I told him stories, not of pain and betrayal but of courage, of second chances, of a grandmother who studied very hard and a grandfather who was a hero. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and simple Sunday dinners with a boisterous, sprawling family that spanned 5 generations. My own parents, now very old, would sit in the place of honor, their faces etched with the lines of a long life, their eyes shining as they watched their great-great-grandchildren play on the floor. The journey that had begun with their fear over a broken engagement had culminated in this. A clan built not on obligation but on love. One quiet evening, Falkren and I sat on our porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. His hair was fully white now and my own was a silvery gray. He reached for my hand, his grip still firm, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern of my wedding band, now worn thin with decades of wear. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble, "when I first saw you in that library, so serious and so brave, I had no idea you would build all of this for us." I leaned my head against his shoulder, the solid, steady presence of him as comforting as it had been on the day we met. "I had to come back from a very dark place to be the woman who could build it," I said softly. It was the closest I had ever come to speaking of my first life to anyone. He didn't ask for clarification. He simply turned his head and pressed a kiss to my hair. "And I will be grateful for every day of it," he murmured. "In my first life I died with hatred in my heart, clutching photographs of a betrayal that spanned 40 years. I died alone, unwanted even in death. In this life I lived to see my great-grandchildren. I lived to be buried, not as an unwanted shame, but as the beloved matriarch of a family that revered me. On my tombstone, next to Falkren's, our names were etched together, a final, permanent testament to the union that had defined my true existence. The end of my second life was not a moment of bitterness, but a gentle closing of a circle. I had been weighed down by a stain my whole first life, and after death I had wanted only a clean name. I had achieved so much more. I had found a love that was pure, a family that was my own, and a happiness that was simple, profound, and entirely mine. I closed my eyes for the last time, surrounded by the love I had created, my hand held by the man who had never let go, just as he promised. The story of Alara Vance was no longer a tragedy. It was a story of a soul who, given a second chance, had the courage to choose herself, and in doing so found everything. The end.